So am I set to go, Emily?
You're good, Jim. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much for covering all that stuff that you did and helping in this presentation. We couldn't do it without you. So
Thank you.
good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for taking the time to sign up and attend this class. I'm hoping that you'll get some value out of it, and we answer all your questions the best we can. Today, we're going to talk about cooperative and piggybacking best practices. And I do want to acknowledge that in attendance today, we have attendees from schools and universities that make up about 20% of the total attendees. And from local government attendance, it makes up about 25%. State agencies about 45%, and other authorized users about 10%. So, we understand there's a diverse group here that have different laws that pertain to them. There's different laws and processes that apply to different attendee groups, and we have included content on both state finance law and general municipal law. Keep in mind that although we have done so, this presentation is not going to be all inclusive and fully comprehensive to address very specific situations and processes. So there will be Q&A opportunities that we can address those kinds of things. This presentation is packed with a lot of information. It is kind of long. I'm going to do my best to get the entire presentation in and address the Q&A we received in advance. And as Emily said, the chat will be recorded so we can get to those and respond. The key thing is we're going to respond to all the Q&A, whether it's today or at a future point, but we'll do our best to address it today. And I just want to say that we also have our customer service that routinely fields questions. So next slide, please. So we're going to talk just a bit about the realities of our public procurement world. Next slide, please. So some of the things we want to recognize in public procurement realities is that our primary purpose is to obtain quality goods and services for our governmental entity by ensuring the prudent use of taxpayer funds. Purchasing laws have become more complex, staffing has decreased as workloads have increased, and our budgets have declined. This is the same old story with government. It always seems like we are quite often doing more with less. And we do recognize that. So we must continually look for new tools to make our government agencies more effective and efficient. So government cooperation. This is the use of piggyback or cooperatives, joint solicitations. These inspire public confidence that we are using our resources wisely. Why reinvent the wheel if we don't have to? This allows us basically the government cooperation as a tool. It allows us to save time and money while providing the protections and ensuring prudent use of taxpayer funds. And it provides economies of scale so that you can also demonstrate savings there. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about piggybacking and cooperative procurement and how they relate. There are different ways to use them. We're going to try and touch on the differences in your situations. Next slide, please. So piggybacking is a term for a process where one governmental entity will extend their pricing in terms of their contract to others and allow them to create their own contract. It's a competitively awarded and must include language allowing other governmental entities to utilize the contract. So we're gonna provide here some a sample of language that OGS uses, and as you can see, it's going to be in the next two slides as well. The definition covers a couple slides. So in this example of the language we use, it says any contract resulting from this solicitation may be extended to additional states or governmental jurisdictions upon mutual written agreement between New York State and the contractor. Next slide, please. And as it continues in this example of our language, it allows the ability for someone else to request to piggyback our contract. Political subdivisions and others authorized entities within each participating state or governmental jurisdiction may also participate in any resulting contract in such state normally allows participation by such entities. And then New York State, and then if someone else enters into it, New York State reserves the right to negotiate additional discounts based on any increased volume granted by such extensions. And then here in New York, you must purchase the exact same item. You have to use the same terms and conditions as presented in the original solicitation. And, same item, same price under the same terms and conditions. You can't substitute a different brand. You can get a better price, but not a higher price. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we're giving you a sample of NIGP's definition of a piggyback. Piggyback cooperatives. It's a form of intergovernmental cooperation, cooperative purchasing, in which any entity will be given the pricing and terms and conditions entered into by the larger entity. You can go, we're showing you what the NIGP website search box looks like. You can go there and you can, pull down the full definition. I want to point out that you have to keep in mind that this is for informational purposes, because New York State, when you're looking up definitions, because New York State may define terms slightly different. We're not saying that this is the defined term of art in New York State. We're just saying this is a definition of a piggyback that NIGP uses. Next slide, please. So as far as a piggyback definition, this is the definition of piggybacking in New York State when utilizing other existing contracts, when, which can be found, this can be found on the OGS website under the guide for piggybacking in New York State. So we will have a link to that later. So the definition is by the New York State Finance Law, Article 11, Section 163, subsection 10E, empowers OGS to authorize purchases required by state agencies and contracts let by other state agencies, the U.S. government or any other state with the concurrence of the Office of State Comptroller and under appropriate circumstances. This type of procurement option is called piggybacking. Next slide, please. So this is a continuation of the definition in the OGS guide for piggybacking. As with other forms of state procurement, contracting through piggybacking remains subject to internal and external review and must be consistent with the policies and principles of the government public contracting. When using this form of procurement, the requesting agency should examine and weigh certain factors in order to determine the appropriateness of the piggybacking as the preferred methodology over other contracting alternatives. So you have some obligations under our definition. So the New York State Finance Law allows OGS to authorize state agencies to follow a process which will allow them to utilize piggybacking as a tool. There is a link on slide 19 of this presentation to the OGS website that I just mentioned in the last slide. It provides guidance for both state agencies in New York City. There also is guidance for local governments and other entities wishing to piggyback or use cooperative contracts. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the definition of cooperative procurement. Cooperative procurement is a joint action taken when two or more entities combine their requirements to obtain advantages of volume purchases. It includes administrative savings and other benefits. It can also be a very, it can also be a variety of arrangements whereby two or more public procurement entities or agencies purchase from the same supplier or even multiple suppliers using a single invitation for bids or a request for proposal for services. And many times the cooperative procurement efforts might result in contracts that other entities piggyback. And we did cover that definition of that NIGP uses. It basically takes two forms: joint solicitation and piggybacking. Next slide, please. And I just want to mention too, with respect to cooperative procurements for local government, there is the ability for local government to both piggyback and enter into their own agreement, and there are opportunities for local government to do purchase orders. However, both of these are governed by the cooperative that you're looking to use and what that allows, and your own rules and process. And sometimes there are forms that need to be filled out with the cooperative to allow you to participate. So there are a couple of pieces that go along with all of this. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what the law allows. Okay, next slide, please. So for piggybacking contracts, the general municipal law was amended to add a new section 16. This authorizes the piggybacking of certain contracts. Okay, and there is a link to the general municipal law, section 103, and it has specifically paragraph 16 or section 16 that allows you to do this. We did get a question in the Q&A in advance about the expiration of that, which was July 31st, 2023. It has been extended through June 30th, 2026, and it's set to expire then. And they could extend it again at some point if they so choose. So I believe that answers some questions that people might have had in advance. So this law will allow the use of contracts issued by all local governments within New York State and other governmental agencies outside of New York State if the piggyback language is included in the original solicitation. So similar to the clause that I shared that OGS uses, this language needs to be in the original solicitation that you're looking to piggyback. So if you are entering into a contract that you may envision allowing someone to piggyback down the road, you would want to have language in there that allows that. There is guidance published on the OSC website. And if you do have questions, I would suggest that you speak with your attorneys, because they're always the best one to make sure that you're staying in line with what all the laws and rules are. Next slide, please. Now, this slide is the general municipal law. I just highlighted certain parts of it to boil it down to, some of the things that I just covered, and the pertinent parts kind of in layman's terms, what I would think, not that the rest of it isn't important, it all is, but I wanted to highlight so you could get the basic gist of it. And this is available for later. I'm not going to read it over again. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about what to consider in determining if a piggyback is appropriate. Some of the things that you have to think about in advance to say, hey, should we be doing a piggyback, and leading you down that path. Next slide, please. So these are prerequisites to piggybacking, with some of them geared more toward local government, and some may be specific to local government, I would say. So the contract must have been let by the United States or any agency thereof any state or any other political subdivision or district therein. So it must be a US contract. The contract must have been available for use by other governmental entities. That means that they had to have language to say that it is available for others to use. Okay. And the contract must have been let to the lowest responsible bidder or on the basis of best value in the manner consistent with the law. So there are requirements that, for commodities, generally it's low price, best value at times is more for services. There are restrictions on some of those types of services that can be piggybacked based on various laws. And if you're a locality, there has to be an adoption of a local law, rule, or regulation or resolution, as the case may be, authorizing the use of best value for awarding purchase contracts. So that's where you would talk with your legal and make sure you have that ability. If you don't, then you may look to pass something like that in order to take advantage of piggybacking. Next slide, please. So those were the previous ones are prerequisites. These are things you consider when you're looking at other agreements as well. When you're piggybacking a contract, that bids were solicited competitively through a public solicitation process, which would have included advertising in some manner. For OGS, we use, the New York State contract reporter at a minimum. But, your entity may have different areas to post and different ways to post a notification to the public so that they're aware. The bids need to be sealed. And this is to guard against fraud, favoritism, or collusion. So, sealed bids, usually with a bid opening at one time. The bid specifications were fair and open. They weren't skewed toward a particular vendor or system, or whatever they, sometimes people have something they're used to getting and they want a specific type, but a specific spec, and that may be necessary. But if it's not necessary, you have to show that you were fair. So you had, you weren't too refined in your clause to make it unfair, so you didn't have competition. The award was to the lowest bidder, and that there was no process in which other bidders were not the lowest bidder, and then were encouraged to drop their prices for the purpose of being awarded the bid. So in other words, no second bite at the apple. One bid, one fair competition. Those are things that you have to consider when piggybacking. Next slide, please. So cooperatives are resources to check for contracts to consider piggybacking. And as I said, you can use cooperatives. At some point, you may be able to just place an order if you're allowed by your rules and that cooperative. However, cooperatives are also a source to piggyback cooperative contracts and then enter into your own agreement. So here are a few of the various national cooperative examples. Omnia Partners in the public sector section, Sourcewell, which is formerly NJPA, a NASPO Value Point, Buy Broad National Purchasing Cooperative. Next slide, please. So another thing to consider is, when you're thinking about piggybacking or thinking about using other contracts, can a New York State centralized contract meet your need? So there is kind of a process in the order of purchasing that you do need to follow to make sure that piggybacking was the tool that you use. So you may want to consider using a centralized contract to meet your needs. You ask yourself that question, can it? we already have state contracts that may meet your needs. Some of these are like road salt and fuels are cooperative in nature. For these, you would sign up to participate prior to the bid in our file requirement system. So you would enter into it's almost like a cooperative that you would participate prior to us making the award. So state contracts, we have them for the procurement of commodities, services, and technology. They're made available to local governments and school districts through New York State Office of General Services OGS website. You can find them all there. Local governments and school districts may make purchases at the same prices and under the same terms and conditions as the state. So you were able to take advantage of our terms and conditions and our pricing. These contracts include, as I said, awards for road salt, fuel, and then vehicles, heavy equipment, computer hardware, software, school buses, and a lot more. There's a link at the bottom of this slide to our website, to our awards list. You can go there and you can check that out. We also have a class, just so you know, we also have had a class for navigating our website. And so that would be something you could look at later. We have some of those posted from previous gov buys. And so you can go out and check those out if you haven't attended the class, and it'll give you a good tutorial for using our website. And so if our contracts don't meet your need, then you consider piggybacking in the order of purchasing precedence. Next slide, please. Okay. So the first two bullets cover the use of OGS contracts. These are the majority of state contracts can be used as soon as they are awarded for OGS, and you can place orders directly with the awarded contractors listed and include the state contract number on both the purchase order and the original, and should come on the original invoice presented for payment. So you can simply sometimes just cut orders. Some of our contracts have a couple of steps for maybe a mini bid process, but in general, consider New York State contracts just for ease of use. Now, if you are going to try to piggyback a contract, agencies, so state agencies, SUNY, CUNY, and the city of New York, they would use this form in getting permission from OGS to piggyback another entity's contract. It's still subject to the other necessary approvals. So the link at the bottom of this slide goes to the OGS website piggybacking page. I mentioned that previously in slide 9. Okay. Next slide, please. So another thing to consider is county contracts. County government boards in New York State may authorize the inclusion of a provision in their purchase contracts and contracts for services which are awarded to the lowest responsible bidder after public advertising for any political subdivision to obtain commodities or services under such contracts. These procurements are made under these contracts by other localities. They must be made in accordance with the rules adopted by the county board. These rules prescribe the conditions under which and the manner in which the procurements may be made. So that's for locals. Next slide, please. It's a continuation in these county contracts. Information relative to county contracts that have been extended to other localities can be obtained from county purchasing agents or other appropriate county officials. And certain counties list available contracts on their websites or mailing list or are available upon request. We will cover some examples of this under Albany County in a few slides. Next slide, please. So we're just say what, now that we've summarized the things you can do, we're gonna just quickly kind of cover some of the things we did and just reiterate the best practices to consider when piggybacking. That contracting through piggybacking remains subject to internal and external review and must be consistent with the policies and principles of the government public contracting. This goes for every type of governmental entity. There are factors to weigh in order to determine the appropriateness of piggybacking as a preferred methodology over other contracting alternatives, as like some of the examples that I gave previously, where in the order of purchasing, you may be able to utilize a centralized contract, and you might be required in your order of purchasing to use a centralized contract. So, or there may be another contract available that you would piggyback if, just say, if you hadn't, let me try and re-clarify this. You have to use the order of purchasing. You have to weigh the facts of whether the piggyback is appropriate. And it may be that the piggyback is appropriate to use another contract if your form function utility isn't met by some other type of procurement step. Next slide, please. So the following, these are factors from the piggybacking guidelines. So these are on the OGS website in their entirety. This is where I had mentioned the other link before to the OGS website on piggybacking. It is in the slide presentation. These factors show up. These are to be considered to help New York State agencies determine the appropriateness of piggybacking over other contracting alternatives. So this is the process. There's a subject matter comparison. There should be an equivalency between the product or service sought to piggyback and the original contract, which should reflect their agency's form, function, and utility requirements. There's a procurement method that would say the size and scope of the new acquisition should be evaluated in comparison to the original acquisition and its method of award. The notice of originating agency is where the subject of the original acquisition in a New York State agency specific contract and the original contracting entity should be contacted and advised of the intended piggyback. So they know that you're going to utilize it. Notification to the originating agency is not an issue for centralized contracts open to multiple entities. There's a consent of vendor terms of piggyback. So the vendor needs to consent to the piggyback request, and it must be in a written legal form. Could be a contract letter, an agreement, letter agreement, it's something like that. Separate from a purchase order, which sets forth agreed terms of a piggyback. A decision on whether to amend the original agreement or to execute a separate independent contract based upon the original contract must be considered based upon the facts and circumstances. So absence of other acceptable established contracting alternatives. So why is piggybacking the appropriate mechanism to use for this procurement? For example, timing, level playing field, nature of use. Were other procurement methods considered? So you need to demonstrate that you did consider all the tools of different type of procurement processes in order to determine that piggybacking was the best for you. And then pricing justification. Similar to other methods of procurement, your agency must document that the price for the proposed acquisition is reasonable under the circumstances, and whether pricing concessions have been requested and obtained from the contractor based on the increased volume purchase of under the agreement. So the next slide, please. So this one is on evaluating cooperative contracts. So based on OSC's guidance, contracts that were awarded through a competitive process and awarded to the lowest responsible bidder or awarded by best value may be piggybacked. And if piggybacking a contract awarded by best value, the local government needs to have passed the required local law or resolution allowing them to award their own purchase contracts by best value. Next slide, please. So in evaluating cooperative contracts, the following questions should be asked. Why is piggybacking the appropriate mechanism to use for this procurement? Timing, cost savings are examples. Were other procurement methodologies considered? Have market conditions changed since the original award? For example, price fluctuations, availability of supply, and have you determined the reasonableness of price for the piggyback volume? And that would imply that if the volume went up, did you try to get better pricing? And OGS does try to do that sometimes when our volume is increased. Some cooperatives do have tiers or levels of either dollar volumes or numbers of items, and when they hit those tiers, discounts increase. So that is one thing that does justify that at times. It can be used for justifying it, but not limited to that. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about best practices to consider. So it's best to do comparison shopping between state, county, and national cooperative contracts. We have some examples. So there may be various organizations out there with cooperative contracts, right? And so you should be looking at different cooperative contracts to determine which one meets your need, and then between those that meet your need, which ones offer you the best pricing options, because not all cooperative contracts are created equal. So here are some examples of those cooperative contracts that are out there: office supplies, industrial supplies, janitorial supplies, automotive supplies. Best practices to issue a formal document amongst the cooperatives. So it's more of a formal procurement. And then keeping documentation for everybody, auditors in one place, but not just for auditors. It's good for anybody that looks at it in the future or has a need to look at the documents. Next slide, please. So these are documents that we're going to show you in the next few slides are samples to some degree. This is a sample that we used in Albany County. This is good for the local municipalities to use. These forms are designed to capture justification for utilizing the piggyback process. And so as you can see in the slide, there are issues to consider. Was the contract let by the United States or agency thereof, or any state or other political subdivision or district therein? And then it gives you a space to reply. And then, the answer should be yes. And then, maybe citing the type of governmental entity that it is. The second one says, was the contract made available for use by other governmental entities? And that would be yes, and maybe C, clause such and such in the original contract. Was it let as a competitive bid and consistent with the law? Yes, it was an IFB, and maybe you get a copy of that IFB. And then was there a public solicitation of bids consistent with the general municipal law, etc. So you would respond to those types of things with the answers to those things for your record. This is a good place to capture it. They made a nice form. I'm sure you can make your own or or borrow them and do something that is consistent with what your legal department would say to make sure that it meets your requirements. These forms and the questions are designed to capture answers and demonstrate that using it is appropriate. Next slide, please. So this form is a sample form used in the town of Colony. Note the yes, no questions designed to demonstrate that use is appropriate. For an example, it says the contract required sealed submission of bids or offers from the vendors to secure and preserve the integrity of the process and confidentiality of the bids or offers submitted. Yes, no. Well, yes, it did. So you check yes. So both of these forms are examples that we used in previous presentations that Karen Storm had provided to us from Albany County. And we appreciate all the work that she did in doing this class previously. I want to go to the next slide, please. And this is an example for agencies that we talked about. This form is used by state agencies, SUNY, CUNY, City of New York, and getting permission from OGS to piggyback another entity's contract with concurrence of the Office of the State Comptroller and under appropriate circumstances. And this form is a little more comprehensive, and the way this form would work is it gets completed by the entity that wants to do a piggyback, and they submit the form to OGS. OGS does use this form in multiple ways. Sometimes they may, we may turn around and take this and then do a centralized contract from it, or we may allow an entity to utilize the piggyback form and get approval to do their own procurement. And when I say procurement, I'm referring to doing their own contract vehicle, where the piggyback contract is the master agreement. And then this form would be the allowing them to create their own contract from that. And based on everything that we've talked about, they followed all those steps previously. Next slide, please. So historically, these are examples of the ones Albany County has used, the cooperatives. It is best to go to their websites to confirm what is current, because this slide may not be 100% current, but they've given examples of cooperatives that they've used from Omnia Partners, Office Depot, Hill and Marks, Janitorial Supplies, Lowe's, Gov Connection, DSN Sports, Rico, and they said they saved $35,000 over 5 years. AmSan, it's janitorial products, Safeware, public safety, Cone, elevator maintenance. These were all used by Albany County. There's more. We're providing these so you have ideas of what's out there if you're not familiar. So next slide, please. These are cooperatives used by Albany County, available from Sourcewell, Carpet Contracts, Goodyear, Granger, NAPA, Pitney Bowes, Fuel Master. This just says complicated contract. I'm gonna leave that up to you to just figure out what that means. It must be a comprehensive contract. I'm just joking with you. That's my first joke of the day. Okay. Next slide, please. These are cooperatives used also by Albany County. TIPS USA, NCPA, which is the National Cooperative Purchase Alliance, and NASPO Value Point. Next slide, please. So you don't have to piggyback these. These are examples of New York State OGS cooperative contracts. You just have to participate by following your requirements when OGS opens the file requirement system. We do that when we're developing the bid. So sign up for PNS, so you're notified of when the file requirements are opened. There are a number of different things that we use file requirements for, different types of fuels, road salt. I know fuels have a number of these open right now, I believe. So if you have questions about that kind of stuff, you can reach out to someone in the fuel teams. You can also reach out to our customer services. They're very helpful in directing people where they need to go and getting them the information they need if they can handle it themselves. They're really good at that. So if you have questions on these kinds of things and you want to know more about them, you can go to our website. And because this is a screenshot from our website, and you can also reach out to team leaders in these teams or the contract management specialist that is the administrator of the contract. They can all help you with that. Next slide, please. We're going to show you some examples of New York State OGS piggyback contracts. These are contracts that we piggybacked and made a centralized contract. And you'll notice by the award number, it starts with PGB, and that tells you that it was a piggyback contract. And these are centralized contracts that we piggybacked that authorized users can use. So we did all the work in doing the bid and or piggybacking another contract and documenting everything, so you don't have to. And if the underlying contracts meet your needs, you can just, in many cases, cut purchase orders. So here are some examples. I'm not going to read them all because we have a few slides of these, but there's tires, there's vehicle lifts, pharmaceutical. That's a big one. The pharmaceutical prime vendor contract is an MCAP contract. We have a few different MCAP contracts. That's multi-purchasing out of Minnesota. And there are a few here that are from Sourcewell. Next slide, please. Here are a few more passenger vehicle rentals. I think right now there are 2 contractors on that contract. Merchant Enterprise, I believe. Don't quote me because but that's who I believe is on there. You can go and check that out. Small package delivery, heavy equipment, floor covering. These are some contracts that I think almost every entity could use. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of joint purchasing led by other entities that New York State participated in from the beginning. We participated in the planning, the specifications, the solicitation, the evaluation, and the award. New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is the New York State and New York State Pharmacy partner. So the environmentally preferable cleaning products and pharmaceutical prime vendor contracts. Here are these 2. So there are a number of contracts that we've already piggybacked that you can, in many cases, just cut purchase orders for under your procurement process. So next slide, please. So we're going to talk about some helpful tools. NCPP, which stands for National Cooperative Procurement Partners. They are a tool to go to, somewhere where you can find things. North America's premier associate for cooperative procurement. They're leading the way in elevating the discussion, advocacy, and educational content surrounding cooperative procurement. They're working collaboratively to bring all the partners in procurement together. Cooperative organizations, strategic suppliers with cooperative contracts, affiliated organizations, and public procurement professionals. Their mission is to produce meaningful resources to support public procurement agencies and become the go-to association for cooperative procurement. So, just know they're a resource out there. They're a helpful tool. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about some resources. So helpful resources. So there are links. There's a link to the general municipal law, section 103, which municipalities would be interested in. We did cover that previously in a few slides, but here's a link to it. There's a link to the OSC website for local government publications and seeking competition. The seeking competition, this is a very comprehensive guide. It's probably 100 pages. It is very comprehensive. It goes into great detail. It's a fantastic resource. I recommend it, for anybody that just wants to sit by the fire and read something sometime. I guess that was my second attempt at a joke, but seriously, it is something to sit down and read and review. It has some great information. I'm sure that anybody can learn something from it every time they read it, no matter how many years you have in with the state. It will remind you of things, and it's a good guide. The piggybacking law exception to competitive bidding at OSC. I guess I'm not 100% sure, but there's probably a more updated memo than 10 and 21. I apologize if there is and we didn't list it. There is the OGS website that has procurement for municipalities. There are guidelines that we have on our website for agencies, municipalities, schools. There are a number of those on our website. There is a link to that. There's an introduction to cooperative purchasing that from NASPO Value Point, and then professional cooperative purchasing programs, NIGP. All of these links and resources are they're really good tools, and you should go out and check them out as you have time. Next slide, please. So helpful resources. I had mentioned this previously, and it was in another slide. I had it in the bottom. It's the guide for piggybacking in New York State. The first link, and then there is a local government management guide for seeking competition and procurement. These are both on OGS website. They're very good resources. And we have provided information from these links in this presentation, but just at a very high level. These are very comprehensive, and they do follow a logical format, which is very helpful. Next slide, please. So here's some more helpful resources. The New York State Procurement Guidelines, which I believe will be updated very soon, from my understanding. So if you're looking at this link, this may be an old link as of this week. So if you did look at this before, you're ready to look at the new guidelines. They've been updated. They were almost last updated in 2014. So there'll be some good stuff in that. There's also a National Cooperative Procurement Partners link, NCP P Association. Next slide, please. Now here are a lot of various resources. So the ones that are bold are known cooperatives used by New York State and Albany County. They're all in bold. And this was at a moment in time, so there may be more. It may not be the most up to date. And then I'm not going to read them all, but you should check with your legal department on eligibility to use these various resources, these co-ops. Next slide, please. So next slide is questions about on today's presentation. And I didn't know how much time we would have. I don't know if we want to cover some questions that were previously asked. I think maybe we can post those. I have a list of those. Questions and answers, and I think they can be posted with this presentation. They were from the pre-submitted ones. And then, that may give us time to address any questions that we may have gotten in the chat or are questions that someone wants to ask now.
I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat pertaining to today's presentation materials. So we will be posting the recording of this session along with the PowerPoint slides on the OGS website within a couple of weeks. And once that web page is up, we have your contact info and we'll be emailing everybody a link to that web page along with the link to a survey for today's session. So just keep your eye out for that. Jim, I do see a question here. Can you provide guidelines on the cost savings justification documentation?
Well, the guidance that I would give on the cost, they're talking about the cost savings if they're going to piggyback and demonstrate a reasonableness of price, I'm assuming. So in order to do that, you need to do some benchmarking, right, of other prices. That's one helpful thing. One thing to do on, so you have to have a basis for your cost savings to say, what are you saving it against? What were you paying before, or what did you expect to pay, or what is the going price versus the price that you end up with? And that difference is your cost savings. But how you get to that price, that end price, may vary. I mean, in some of our piggyback agreements, for example, we may have a mini bid process, that further drives price down. In addition, if there's a certain price and then there becomes a volume added that enables you to negotiate a better price, that's a cost savings, and you would document that's what you did. So there are a few different ways to look at the cost savings piece. And sometimes it's driven by volume tiers, reaching a certain tier and in a volume that drives the price down, and you say, hey, we entered into it and now it drives that down. So the documentation of it is just documenting that in your process as you go, is that this is what you did, this is what the price you started with, and then you're benchmarking against other prices to say, hey, is it a how does it compare? And then in your process you may get even better pricing, and then those things would be your cost savings. If you're just talking about cost savings on using an OGS contract, it's easy to benchmark something like that. If you bought it before, then here's the contract price, right? So, any other questions?
Another one came in. Are these all examples of single awarded contracts awarded to lowest bidder, not bidders plural?
No, they are not. So one of the contracts, one of the questions that came in. So I'll talk about our contracts in a second. But one of the questions that came in originally says, many, if not all, cooperative awards are more than one bidder. And it says the New York State General Municipal Law 103 piggybacking verbiage does not allow use cooperative contracts awarded to multiple vendors given GML is specific to awarded to lowest bidder, not bidders, or awarded to a bidder, not bidders, based on best value. And then there was some, and then it said, does OGS piggyback off multiple award contracts? What is OGS process on this? And then someone else, I'm going to dovetail another question is, how to ensure you are getting the best price on piggyback contracts where several vendors have been awarded use of piggyback cooperative contracts. So OGS has some contracts that are multiple award, and we piggyback some piggyback contracts. And generally, we would invite all cooperative awardees to enter into a contract with us as long as they agree to our terms and conditions and meet the minimum qualifications. But with that, we have a secondary procurement process for these, where the purchaser gets 3 quotes for the product needed. Where multiple vendors have been awarded and there is not a required secondary process, our recommendation is to add a round of quotes or mini bids to allow opportunity to get better pricing. And we would say for locals, you know, to consult with OSC on their process for auditing purposes and to speak with your legal, you know, on that. But we do have layers of ways that we have multiple contractors participate when it comes to the piggybacking, and also with cooperatives, there may be more than one contractor. So, you know, I would try to utilize other steps in order to foster competition, again, to drive pricing down and to justify, you know, but whether you can or cannot use it, depending on the type of governmental entity you are, is something that I can't answer. It's more on a case by case basis.